getting the math to scale. So we talked about this earlier, the ARPU to CAC spectrum. There are different philosophies on this that have evolved, particularly over the past 5 years. If your average revenue per customer is low, you may end up with like a cash flow risk, and you may need to do what's called fast scaling, because you may have long CAC payback periods, et cetera, and so you may want to prioritize speed. If your ARPA is high, your average revenue per account is high, say you're Salesforce or HubSpot or something, the risk is different, right? Because you have these big customers that come in, especially in the beginning phases of a startup, where you might be waiting on a deal that's $100,000, and that creates different risk. And you want to be a lot more efficient, right? You want to make sure that you're not running out of money before those deals hit. Every startup entrepreneur has had to deal with this sort of thing. And then there's a third concept called Blitz Scaling, which is something that you probably don't want to do. I don't know your business, but it's a new, there's a great book on it by Reid Hoffman. A lot of business models require what's called Blitz Scaling because they don't actually have value unless they get big. So Uber is a great example of this, right? Like Uber had to get big in order for Uber to be as valuable a company as it is. If Uber had just sort of grown cash efficiently, they wouldn't have created the value that they have because they have those sort of network effects. So there's just 3 different frameworks to think about, and they relate to the balance between your average revenue per account and your cost of acquiring a customer, or your cost per acquisition. In terms of the engines of growth, okay, so how do we grow? Inbound or outbound was like the way to grow for a long time. Is cold calling, telemarketing, etc. Also like interruptive-based ads, spam mail, spam email, etc. It's sometimes in some business models that still works, right? There are models in which outbound is still an efficient method of driving opportunities and customers for your business. Inbound is how do you drive traffic to your website? You convert them into leads. They go to your sales reps. They get worked. You connect with the leads. They become sales opportunities and then become customers. And then the last 10 to really 5 years has seen the emergence of what's called freemium or product qualified leads. So instead of somebody requesting a demo or starting a free trial and then talking to a sales rep, which would be the inbound funnel, or instead of me calling you and convincing you to request a demo, which would be the outbound funnel, people start using from the same traffic sources: organic traffic, direct traffic, paid, etc. Inbound and outbound gets traffic from the same places. But instead of them talking to a human being, they start using the product. And then based on their usage of the product, that qualifies them to talk to a sales rep. So in terms of what qualifies them, right? They may be usage qualified. So they may hit your limits on how much you're willing to let them use your software for free. Or they may just be hand raisers. So some people inside the product may request a demo. They've been using Slack, they've been using Flock, my previous company, they've been using HubSpot, now has a free option, and they may say, I want help on deciding on if I should use the paid version. So there are different engines of growth. Again, you usually are going to focus on one at a time because it's, who chases 2 rabbits catches neither. But think about all of these in terms of their relationship to how much you can afford in terms of CAC and how fast you want to grow. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that different channels are going to convert at different rates because of where they exist in the buyer's journey. So in this graphic on the left, right, Facebook is driving 35% of new users. AdWords is driving 25% of new users. And then if that's all you were tracking, where are my users coming from? You've got 15,000 users, 5,000 converted, 10,000 customers. That's interesting information. But what you will invariably find is that, for example, it might be the targeting you have. It might be where they are in the buyer's journey. Oftentimes, people off search engines are further down the buyer's journey. They're more qualified. And so they may have better retention in terms of returning users. In this graph, they don't. I'm pretty sure I stole this graph from Facebook, so take it with a grain of salt. Uh, but Facebook is accounting for 42% of returning users, 40% of converted customers, and 42% of their returning customers. So Facebook is actually a disproportionately powerful and impactful channel that you want to invest in, because you're slicing that cost of acquisition to lifetime value ratio with that buyer's journey, that virtuous loop that we covered earlier. You're slicing that now, not just by the buyer's journey or the stage of the funnel, not just by the buyer persona, but also by the marketing campaigns. Different types of marketing campaigns, different top of the funnel inputs are going to have different impacts. The interesting one here for me is Instagram, right? So in this fake example, it might look like AdWords is doing better than Instagram, but AdWords, if you follow it down, is only accounting for 3% of returning customers, whereas Instagram is accounting for 30%. Yeah, Facebook definitely made this graphic. All right, so there's one more concept I want to share with you, which is marketing attribution. All of us know that there's not one moment and one thing that influences decisions that we make. And remember, believe it or not, your customers are people too. The inverse of that is I used to threaten to tattoo "We are not the user" on the inside of my team's eyelids, because the goal is to think about the way that they make decisions and what's going to influence them. So you may have different marketing activities, your blog, email, display ad, they attend a webinar, and then they viewed the website pricing page, and then they became a customer. So if you were using last touch attribution, you would say what led to that revenue was the website pricing page. The issue is we know that's not entirely true, because the blog, the email, etc., this is what brought people in, this is what influenced them, and then this is just what helped them overcome that comparison and intent phase to actually become a customer. There's another mechanism, which is called U-shaped attribution, where you give more credit to what brought them in at the first touch, which they may have read your blog, distribute some credibility for the sale between the other things they did, and then some credibility or some weighting to the value of the website pricing page. And the reason this becomes important is because this is going to determine where you invest your time and your budget, right? So in this previous model, you're not going to hire a lot of content marketers. You're not going to spend money on display ads. In this previous model, you're saying that, like, okay, we're going to spend some money on blogging because we're giving it credit for 35% of a given conversion, and the website pricing page, conversion rate optimization, et cetera, we're giving them some credit as well. There's another mechanism called linear attribution, where you just say, cool, everything they did, I'm just going to split it up equally because I'm not weighting what influences people's decision-making process. The other one is time decay, which is based on how long it took them, I'm going to weight it, right? So the blog, if that happened 6 months ago, they found us by the blog, I'm only going to give it credit for 3%. And the reason credit matters, again, is because credit is budget. And so if somebody converts, you're going to say that, like, the blog drove 3% of that value, whereas the webinar drove 25% of that value. Now, I want to add the caveat that you can go absolutely insane trying to come up with different marketing attribution models. There's all kinds of technology out there that you can pay for. There are complex mathematical models. If you are a startup, which by definition the people on this webinar should be or are, or at least interested in startups, you probably don't have a statistically significant sample size to slice data too many ways. Every time you slice data, you reduce the sample size, right? So if I want to do it by buyer persona, and I have 3 buyer personas, and I have 300 customers, now my sample size is only 100 in each of those buyer personas, assuming it's evenly distributed. And that's not statistically significant. Then if I slice it by traffic source, Instagram versus AdWords, that's even less. Then if I slice it by the marketing activities that influence them, that's even less. So what I want you to understand is, as you grow, as you scale, which is why it's in this phase of the presentation, these are optimizations that will help you improve your efficiency and accelerate your growth. But too many startups get way too caught up on things like attribution models and slicing data too many ways. This is my suggestion for if you are a startup and you're growing. What matters is what brought somebody net new into your universe. That's what's going to fuel growth, because nobody knows who you are, sort of by definition. So you could do a U-shaped attribution, or you could do something super simple. But if you're going to do anything that's like super complicated, don't. If you have to pick one of these, I would personally pick first touch attribution, because what matters to me again is what's bringing somebody net new. When you're a startup, I didn't have anybody at Flock who was optimizing the website pricing page, right? So it didn't matter what credibility I gave it, because they weren't going to get any budget anyway. So the blog is getting 100% of the credit here. This will change over time, again, based on your life cycle and based on your goals. Is what is important to you, optimizing the flow through the funnel, in which case you do care. If you want to optimize your conversion rates through the funnel, you care what influenced them. But if you have an efficient funnel, you want to know what's bringing somebody net new into your universe. I want to talk to you about a few other metrics before we wrap up. If you have a sales team, the whole visit to lead rate is basically the quality of the traffic that you're driving and your ability to do conversion rate optimization. The lead to opportunity rate and the opportunity to close rate, so the lead to customer rate, is dependent on the sales team. And when you are a startup, if you are the CMO, this is actually a screenshot from a workshop I do called Couples Therapy for Sales and Marketing Leaders, because sales and marketing leaders tend to bicker worse than husbands and wives do. I actually track how the sales team is forecasting, because different types of leads will close at a different pace and a different value. So if the sales team is forecasting low for the month, I'll actually stop trying to get new blog subscribers, and I'll have the marketing team focus on driving maybe demo request leads, because they close faster. And as a startup, we really want to be disciplined in our cash flow. So we want to make sure that we're hitting our quota every month. So, okay. When you have a small sales team, by the way, resist the urge, just like with the marketing attribution, resist the urge to do very advanced lead scoring, because your sample size is going to be too low. They may try and sell you that software, but it's not worth it, because if you don't have a sufficient sample size, here in the month of January for this particular sales team, I drove less than 150 leads. There's no way to do advanced lead scoring off of 150 leads. I actually rely in the beginning phases on subjective feedback. Sales reps are smart human beings who want to make money. And I let them rate leads high, medium, and low. And I explain to them that if they rate leads high, I'm going to go find what buyer persona it was. I'm going to go find what traffic source drove them. And I'm going to try and bring them more of that. If they mark a lead low, I'm going to try and say, I'm going to find out the same thing. I'm going to go say, okay, that came from Google AdWords. I'm not going to do as much with Google AdWords. So this is where you get into, as you're breaking apart your funnel, can you create some of these leading indicators? This metric is to the lead to customer rate what Net Promoter Score is to customer lifetime value. It's a predictive, subjective metric that helps you when you're earlier on and you have a smaller sample size. Common complaints about sales teams, though, is how quickly you attack a lead. So how fast do they call it, and then how many attempts do they make? Any good relationship goes both ways, right? So the marketing team is driving high quality leads. The sales team, the data that we had, our agreement was that they're supposed to make 6 attempts on a high or medium rated SAL or sales accepted lead. And the time I wrote this dashboard, they weren't quite hitting that. So myself and the head of sales had a conversation about that. So they're holding themselves to this metric, and that's not just a number we picked randomly, by the way. What we did was we looked at what's the inflection point in terms of how many attempts a sales rep has to make based on the probability that they're going to close that lead, right? So once they make 7 attempts on a high-rated lead, it's not really improving the probability that they're going to close that lead, but there's a huge difference between, they've made 3 attempts on a lead and 7 attempts on a lead. And so that's how we set that metric. And again, all of these numbers are going to be subjective to you and your organization. One other thing I want to point out, data especially when you're a startup. Look for aberrations. Anything that doesn't fit the expected pattern may not be bad. It might just be a different insight. And so these are 5 of the sales reps when HubSpot was super, super small. The 5 sales reps that I was tracking. And Peter, by the way, he was on vacation this month. It's not that he's just a terrible sales rep. But I was tracking like how many leads they each rated high and medium. And I noticed that Ted was making more attempts on medium rated leads than high rated leads. And because I was looking for any aberration in the data, because that doesn't make sense based on the data I showed you before, I went and asked him, I'm like, why are you doing this? And it's because he had come up with a different way to sell to medium rated leads. So medium rated leads in the nurturing sequence he was doing, he was actually closing them at a much higher rate if he made more attempts. And so I was able to detect this weird bit of data and then train the rest of the sales team on what Ted was doing so that they could close more of their medium rated leads. Whenever you're looking at data, look for aberrations. If you find an aberration, grow the sample size as quickly as you can and see if it sticks, right? If a specific marketing traffic source is converting at a much higher rate than all your other sources, try and grow the traffic from that source until you have a statistically significant sample size and see if that remains true. It may have just been an aberration, which is fine. You learned something. Or you may have discovered something new about your business